Well, welcome, Mr. Secretary.
It's great to be back, Mark.
Good to have you here. A lot of things on the table these days in Washington, D.C. All of it's about spending. All of it's about spending reductions. Obviously, agriculture is not going to be missed on this whole thing. Let's talk about Farm Bill 2012. The direct payments, I know, are an issue. A lot of people are concerned about conservation. Where do you see everything headed?
Well, Mark, I tell you, the good news is that we are seeing a pretty good, robust farm economy, which is helpful, which makes it a little bit easier to talk about the kinds of things we're going to have to talk about. I don't think there's any question that as the super committee meets, that direct payments are on the table, and I think you're going to see significant changes in that safety net. Hopefully, it will not compromise the important role the safety net plays in providing protection for folks when prices go down or natural disaster strikes. I think you're going to see a combination of a revenue and a disaster program to replace the direct payment program. That would be my guess. And hopefully, it will be structured in a way that it works for everybody. Part of the problem is that some of our programs work better for some commodities than others. That's been a criticism. And we frankly have to justify these programs to the other 98% of the country that doesn't farm. And I think one of the concerns was the direct payment system. So I think we'll get rid of that concern and sort of refocus and restructure the safety net. Crop insurance is still going to be very, very important, and I think it'll be a critical part of the safety net. On the conservation side, I think you're looking at probably reduced dollars, but doesn't mean that the need is reduced. In fact, it's probably going to increase over time. So we're looking for creative ways to enhance and encourage more conservation investment by the private sector. And what I mean by that is if you can quantify or measure and verify the result of conservation on the farm, there may be a business in the city that needs that result and would be willing to pay for that result and let the farmer basically do the work. We're also working with regulatory agencies to try to see if we can create a new concept called regulatory certainty. Farmer does certain conservation practices in exchange for which he gets deemed in compliance with certain regulations, takes some of the risk and some of the unknowns out of the regulatory structure. We think that might incent more conservation investment. So we're going to look for creative ways. We're going to have to do more with less, but I think we're up to it.
Right.
That's the way folks out in the farm work, and that's the way we're going to work at USDA.
And I assume we're going to see some of our cues will be coming from the super committee, correct?
I think they set the fiscal framework, if you will. If they actually get their job done and actually do the work of reducing the budget by $1.5 to $2.5 trillion, that's obviously going to mean an impact on a lot of programs. Our concern also at USDA is making sure that we continue to provide the services that people expect from us and to do it in a way that's most effective and most efficient. So we're going through a very elaborate process of taking a look at our footprint, taking a look at the way in which we do business internally and externally to try to figure out if there are efficiencies.
All right, so we're going to be watching and see what happens with the Farm Bill. I want to talk energy with you for just a moment, too. Obviously, that's been another thing that's been targeted. We did get the extension of the VTEC for ethanol for agriculture. But going forward, you know, I think most people in the biofuels world realize that one's going to come to an end. What other support, if any, will we see from the federal government for ethanol specifically?
Well, I was happy to see that the Senate turned down Senator McCain's effort to try to restrict our ability to use existing programs to help build out the infrastructure of the renewable fuel industry. We can use existing programs under the 2008 Farm Bill and existing appropriations under some of the more traditional programs under rural development to build out the infrastructure, to build out the flex pumps or the flexible fuel pumps at convenience stores and gas stations. That can still continue, and we are committed to doing that. I think you're going to continue to see a commitment to the renewable fuel standard, which I think really helps to drive the industry to the next level. And we're looking for creative ways to make a difference, to create new industries. Exciting opportunity with Navy and the Department of Energy and USDA coming together, putting resources together from existing programs, not new spending, existing programs, redirecting it to help build an aviation biofuel industry, a drop-in fuel industry. The Navy's going to purchase the fuel, so it's a good opportunity for new biorefineries to be built, a customer already in place. And the commercial aviation industry is very interested in this because it will provide them greater certainty in terms of pricing, and also they'll allow them to comply with greenhouse gas regulations in Europe that might make it more difficult for them under existing circumstances. So a lot of great potential there, new job opportunities in rural areas, and higher incomes for farmers. That's a good thing.
You've talked to a lot of the biofuels industry, and you know the challenges we've had going beyond just corn-based ethanol. We're going to have to change that renewable fuel standard to meet that?
Well, I don't know if we're going to change it. I think we have to continue to work on research, which is what we're doing on these non-food feedstock opportunities. What I just referred to, the Navy arrangement is going to be non-food. I think, frankly, it's somewhat of a false argument, but it's out there, and so we have to deal with it and address it. The Renewable Fuel Standard proposes and suggested that we cap corn-based ethanol at 15 billion gallons and that we move for the balance of the Renewable Fuel Standard amount for non-corn, and I think we'll do that. We need to pick up the pace of the development of that, and I think you're going to continue to see in the next year or two new biorefineries come online using everything from algae to agricultural waste to woody biomass to produce those new fuels. I think it's an exciting opportunity for us. We've reduced our reliance on foreign oil from 60% of we imported to 52%. Mm-hmm. The reason we did that was a biofuel industry, and consumers today, when they go out, they put that gas in their tank, they're paying 90 cents a gallon less for it than they would otherwise pay for it because we have a robust biofuel industry. We've got to continue that.
Excellent point. Let's talk about trade. We've got some new trade agreements that have just been passed. Some very good news. It's been the lifeblood for growth in agriculture.
No question about it. We're looking at a record export year this year, $137 billion of ag exports, $20 billion above last year. That's going to continue. We have an American brand that's the best in the world. We're going to continue to market and strategically focus on the countries that make a difference. I'm excited about these free trade agreements because they're going to improve economic opportunities for farmers, $2.3 billion of additional ag trade that will allow us to continue to have record years. We've got a trade surplus. A lot of people don't realize that across the country in ag, $42 billion projected this year. Every $1 billion of ag sales, Mark, generates 8,400 jobs at home, so it's not just incomes for farmers and ranchers, it's also employment, which I think is one of the reasons why agriculture is responsible for 1 out of every 12 jobs in the economy today.
Real quick, a lot of discussion about Chinese currency and what should be done in Washington. I know you've been involved in some of that. What's your outlook for that? The key customer of ours.
Well, on the currency side, I'll leave that to Tim Geithner and the folks at Treasury. That's sort of at a different field. What we're trying to do is to make sure we have a strong relationship with China in the ag area. So we continue to work with them, continue to focus on new opportunities to break down barriers. One opportunity I think that the free trade agreements give us is to reopen discussions about beef and see if we can perhaps get them to reopen that market that's been closed for far too long. We have the same opportunity, I think, with Japan. That would be an enormous boost to the cattle industry.
I want to talk a little about the statement from Commissioner Jackson from EPA last week regarding we're not going to regulate farm dust. The huge relief out here in the countryside. That's been an issue. I know you've talked about a lot since taking over as Secretary. What about on the waterfront? Can you give us any update there? What do you see EPA doing?
Well, I think it's an indication of their sensitivity and understanding of what's going on in the countryside. I think part of the reason why the administrator made the statement she made was because she's been out here, she's been talking to farmers, to the knowledge of the folks that I talked to. This is the first time they can remember an EPA administrator coming out on the farm. I think because of that, I think they're more sensitive, and I think you're going to continue to see an understanding coming out of EPA on agriculture.
I've got to ask you about disasters. I mean,
sure.
Texas drought, Oklahoma, Kansas, mess down there, finally getting a little bit of rain down there. A little concerned about drought now moving up through the north central plains. Missouri River flooding. And I know this is all at a time where we just can't spend more money. What do you see for relief for both of those?
Well, I think you're going to see a fairly significant crop insurance indemnity payout this year, probably significantly higher than it's been in the last couple of years. I don't think what we have learned from this year is that disasters will happen. They'll happen in bunches, and when they do, we have to be there with a safety net. So that's why I think it's going to be important, even though the disaster programs have expired under the 2008 Farm Bill on September 30th. I think you're going to see a renewed effort to try to reinstitute some form of disaster assistance. Now, it's got to be improved. We can't wait 2 years to make disaster payments. The bankers won't wait. The farmers shouldn't wait. We've got to do a better job of designing and engineering this program so it works quicker. And it works for all commodities. I was in upstate New York. Who would have ever thought a hurricane would go that far inland? Those fruit and vegetable producers, they're stuck. Those programs don't work. The programs don't work for them. So it's important to understand the diversity of American agriculture, and as we're designing these safety net programs, it isn't just about row crops. As important as row crops are, it's about specialty crops. It's about everything that's produced in this country.
We've got about a minute. Talk about your priorities. I mean, obviously, it's everything seems to be reactive. I know you've had priorities that really. I know trade's been a big part of it. Biofuel's been a big part of it. Keeping more building jobs in America. What do you see for the balance?
Well, I'll tell you, one issue that hasn't been discussed enough is how we get more people into farming, and I think it's important for us to focus on that in terms of the 2012 Farm, Food, and Jobs Bill is what I'm calling it. We need to figure out ways in which we get younger people into this business, and I think it's not just the farm legislation. It's also tax policy. It's also regulatory policy. It's also other programs, because we've got an aging farming population. We've got to address that.
Very good. Mr. Secretary, thanks for being with us. Secretary of Agriculture Tom Vilsack joining us here in this very special segment for Market to Market.